Welcome to today's webinar, Soybean Aphids are resistant to pyrethroids and now what? My name is Laura Isles. I'm one of the co-directors of the North Central IPM Center. We're one of 4 regional IPM centers supported by the USDA NIFA Crop Protection and Pest Management Regional Coordination Program. We have a mission to coordinate IPM across the region by sharing and promoting IPM research, extension, and teaching activities. During today's webinar, if you have any questions, please type them in the Q&A part at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we will have our speaker answer those questions at the end of the presentation. So now I'm happy to introduce Matt O'Neill from Iowa State University, and we'll let you take it away, Matt.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay, Laura?
Yes.
Excellent. Thanks for the opportunity to share some work that we've been doing here at Iowa State University in the Department of Plant Pathology, Entomology, and Microbiology. I'm going to share with you some work that focuses on this pest, the soybean aphid, which if you're in the Midwest and you're growing soybeans, you're probably familiar with it. Also, just relax, that's not actual size. So let's set the stage here. I'm going to pose some questions that I'm hoping by the end of this webinar, you'll be able to answer. So hold on to these. We'll go through them one by one, and then we'll return to them at the end to see if you got them right. So first question, on what 2 plants does the soybean aphid feed in North America? There's 2 of them. You already know one of them. Next question, on what year was pyrethroid resistance first reported for the soybean aphid? When did it first get reported for the soybean aphid? Third question, what percentage of aphids in Iowa are resistant to pyrethroids? Go ahead and hazard a guess here, but through the talk, I'm going to share some estimates that we made in the last couple of years. And finally, what other insecticides besides pyrethroids can be used to kill soybean aphids? All right, so jot a couple answers down here, and then we'll return to these questions at the end. So the soybean aphid. Soybean aphid is a pest of soybeans, hence the name soybean aphid. Typically they're found on the underside of leaves like you see here. They're tiny little critters, aphids, meaning that they feed on phloem and sap with their piercing sucking mouth parts. The aphid is fairly simple, but it's got a remarkable life cycle. Right now in its life cycle, we're experiencing the population that exists on soybeans. And these are all asexually reproducing aphids. For the most part, they're wingless, but every once in a while they produce offspring that have wings so they can colonize other soybean fields. In about 2 months, they're going to start producing males and females that reproduce sexually, that fly to buckthorn, their overwintering host, where they lay eggs, they spend the winter, they produce another generation that then flies back to soybeans. So fairly complicated, but for our part of the summer, we're mostly focused on the aphids on soybeans. And what's really worrisome about them is that they reproduce asexually, which means they don't need to mate. They don't have to waste any time with that. They just are females on soybeans and they're reproducing live birth. So if you cut away a soybean aphid, you'd see a bunch of little nymphs inside her, and she's giving birth to them one at a time, so that one aphid could produce a lot of offspring in a short period of time. And these feeding on soybeans is a problem because it will reduce yield. So how do we prevent that? Well, there's 3 big ways that you can manage aphids in soybeans. There are aphid-resistant soybean varieties that are available that will dramatically reduce the aphid's ability to reproduce. Unfortunately, these are not widely adopted by farmers. There's low commercial adoption. They are available through some seed sources that especially service the organic industry, but not so much our large conventional seed companies. There is biological control, which means there are insects that will attack the aphid and feed on them, including tiny parasitoid wasps that lay their eggs inside the aphid and feed on them internally, killing them. So the aphid has a lot of these natural enemies, but in general, they're not always able to prevent outbreaks. And most farmers know this because they have to rely on insecticides. And since the soybean aphid arrived in 2000, we've seen a dramatic increase in the amount of insecticide used in soybeans, especially for the aphid. Lambda cyhalothrin, a pyrethroid, is the most commonly used. in part because it's cheap, it's broad spectrum, and it can be mixed with herbicides and fungicides. Unfortunately, it has been so wide used that farmers are now starting to see resistance to pyrethroids. This was first reported in 2015, and a group at Minnesota did a survey in 2017 to show that resistance was occurring in the Dakotas, especially Minnesota. And although it's not showing up on this map, there were reports in Iowa as well. More recently, a group of us at Iowa State conducted a survey of the northern counties where we typically see soybean aphid outbreaks. So this map shows you where in our 3-year survey we focused on commercial soybean fields, going out and collecting aphids to see if they were resistant to insecticide. And the dots are counties where we went into those commercial fields. The triangles are a special kind of trap that's used to trap migrating soybean aphids. If there's time, I'll talk about that, those data. But right now I want to talk about the data that we collected in those commercial fields. We went out both before and after a pyrethroid was sprayed and looked to see what the populations were like in terms of the number of plants infested with aphids, and over here, the number of aphids per plant. And in the fields where a farmer sprayed insecticide, the percentage of plants infested with aphids did not change, both before and after. The number of aphids per plant also didn't change. Although you see a slight numerical decrease, there was so much variation before and after that statistically, I can't say that those two populations are different from each other. And suffice to say that the lambda-cyhalothrin that was sprayed is not working. Before resistance occurred, we would see no aphids after a spray. That is clearly not happening now. So how do we confirm, how do we look for insecticide-resistant aphids? There's two general ways to do this. One is to use what are called bioassays, where you treat a leaf with the insecticide that you're interested in, and then artificially infest it with aphids to see if they survive or not. This is very effective in determining if the aphids are resistant, but it requires you to use live aphids that you collect in the field. It's fairly time consuming, it's low throughput. A faster way is to use molecular markers. If you know the mutations that are contributing to resistance, you can collect aphids, they can be dead, they will be dead after you do this. You will screen for the genes using a gel analysis like here, where you basically look to see if the mutations in the aphid's genome is there that are associated with the change in the proteins that the aphid, that are targeted by the insecticide. This can be high throughput where you can screen many aphids at once. And it's this way that we're going to use in the results that I'm going to share with you in a moment. So I want to talk a little bit about pyrethroid resistance. Pyrethroids target a specific part of the aphid's anatomy, their nerve cells, the voltage-gated sodium channel that is part of how nerves communicate to each other. And there's a big protein in the nerve cells that has 4 domains. There's one region that is specifically mutated to help protect the aphids against these pyrethroids. This has been well studied for many years. We now know that pyrethroid resistance, not only in soybean aphids, but in other aphids, involves many mutations across this voltage-gated sodium channel. And this picture is just a way to show you where and the number and type of mutations are present in all aphids, and a subset of these have been found in the soybean aphid. So this is a ripe target for molecular markers that we can use to detect if an aphid has resistance to pyrethroids. And we can do this in this high throughput amplicon sequencing technique where we grind up the aphids, we identify, we isolate their DNA, we look to see if in that DNA there are the mutations that are producing the resistance, and then we run the sequence to look for them. We did this with aphids that we collected in the field from 2021 to 2023. We tested a total of nearly 2,000 aphids. And this table, although complicated, shows a pretty simple picture. And that picture is 99.9% of all the aphids that we tested had at least one mutation that provides resistance to pyrethroids. These mutants were found in all of the fields in which we had a farmer spray pyrethroids. There was only one field and very few of what are called the wild type, the aphid that is susceptible to the pyrethroid. Right? And that's designated with this WT plus up here. So this column tells us the genotype. We found about 18 different genotypes that are resistant. Their frequency, when all summed together, is about 99%. This column tells you how many of the 10 fields we found those mutants in. These columns tell you what type and how many mutations those genotypes had. So this aphid, genotype 1, had 1 mutation. This had 2. Some had as many as 3. And we already know from some previous lab work how resistant these aphids are. And this is reported in this column, the resistance ratio. Some are only mildly resistant, have about a 3-fold. Some are 35-fold resistant. And this has been published by scientists for both the soybean aphid, Aphis glycinus, and other aphids as well. So what's the point? Well, all the aphids that we have surveyed are resistant pyrethroids. And this is a problem given that typically most farmers use pyrethroids to manage aphids, whether they are scouting or not. So now what do you do? Well, there are a variety of other insecticides that target different parts of the aphid's biology that could be used. And in 2023, as part of an insecticide evaluation trial run by Aaron Hodgson here at Iowa State University, we explored how these different insecticides would affect a soybean aphid population. So we used, in this experiment, thiamethoxam, a neonicotinoid that can be applied to the seed. We used thiamethoxam and lambda-cyhalothrin, that pyrethroid, both applied, the thiamethoxam applied to the seed, the lambda-cyhalothrin was applied to foliage, sprayed in mid-August. We also used that neonicotinoid and that pyrethroid as a mixture applied to foliage. We also used lambda-cyhalothrin alone, and then a novel insecticide that is specific to aphids and other hemipterans, pyrethroids. You know what? I'm not going to even try. We're going to abbreviate this PYZ. Neonicotinoid applied to the seed only, neonicotinoid applied to the seed with lambda-cyhalothrin, and then all the others are applied to the foliage, all applied to the foliage in about mid-August. So what happened? All right, so in this graph, this axis represents the number of aphids per plant that we counted before, that's the gray, and after the foliar application of insecticide. And I'm going to go through each of these individually. So the control, no insecticide was applied, 60 some aphids before. After those foliars were applied to the other treatments, less than 10. That population went down. PQZ, that aphid-specific insecticide, applied at a low and a high rate, we also see a decrease. And these little icons up here represent when it's statistically significant. The seed treatment of the thiamethoxam, those plots, before and after the foliar was applied, no foliar was applied here, it was just a seed treatment, but they also went down. And then we had this treatment where it was that thiamethoxam applied as a seed treatment, but then the lambda-cyhalothrin applied over the top. And here we don't see a difference. Population didn't change before and after that lambda-cyhalothrin was applied. And then we get to this one where the neonicotinoid was applied as a foliar along with lambda-cyhalothrin, and that population went down. The only treatment in which this trend didn't occur was when we applied lambda-cyhalothrin alone. This is the population before This is the population after. It almost doubled. All right, so what's going on? What explanation could help us understand these trends? Well, I think what's going on is, had we not sprayed this population of aphids at this location, it was going to go down. And why? Well, we have a lot of evidence from previous experiments that those natural enemies, those parasitoid wasps, those lady beetles, they can help keep low populations like this under control. And it looks like it was headed in that direction. When we sprayed an insecticide that still works against the aphid, those populations went down. But when we added lambda-cyhalothrin, the population either stayed the same or went up. And I think that's because that lambda-cyhalothrin no longer works against the soybean aphid. It just shrugs it off, Taylor Swift style. But the pyrethroid, that lambda-cyhalothrin, still kills all of the other insects that would be feeding on the aphid. So in this treatment, and in this one especially, we might be clearing away all the natural enemies, but keeping the aphid, allowing them now to continue to grow. So in this way, in an environment where aphids are resistant to pyrethroids and we continue to use them, we are making a bad situation worse. We might exacerbate an aphid population such that it doesn't go down, but it might not even go away, and it may even increase over time. Okay, so to kind of wrap up, let's go back to that pop quiz and those questions that I asked you at the beginning. What two plants does the soybean aphid feed on in North America? Well, if you answered soybeans, you got that one right. But also buckthorn, the overwintering host. This allows the aphid to persist in the United States even after the soybean is gone, and those aphids come off of buckthorn and colonize soybeans year after year. And what year was pyrethroid resistance, did it first get reported? 2015. It's been about a decade now. What percentage of the aphids in Iowa were resistant to pyrethroids? And this is based on our most recent survey of northern Iowa. About 99.9%. So aphids were first reported resistant back in 2015, but now, almost a decade later, almost all of them are resistant to these pyrethroids. What other insecticides can be used to kill soybean aphids? Well, there's a list. It's not a very long list, but there is a list that includes thiamethoxam when it's used as a foliar insecticide. Seed treatment did not provide season-long protection. There's some novel insecticides, and then one that we didn't include that is still available to some farmers depending upon the state, chlorpyrifos or Lorsban. There are some others that haven't been tested. Please check with your local extension office to see what's available in your area. But these are different insecticides that target different parts of the aphid that will provide protection in a way that the pyrethroids no longer do. So what does this mean for farmers, to kind of wrap up? Well, I think it's safe to say you should assume all soybean aphids are resistant to pyrethroids, both those in soybeans and those overwintering on buckthorn. And if there's time, I can show you some data that it supports why we think those aphids are on buckthorn as well. In other words, we're stuck with them. I think this means that farmers need to consider an alternative insecticide. If you're going to use an insecticide, do not rely on the pyrethroids. Evidence is pretty clear now that these will not provide protection. If possible, use an alternative management approach. In the future, consider using an aphid-resistant variety. These work very well, they're all season long, and can provide protection in a way that the pyrethroids do not. Also, consider or avoid using insecticides unless you absolutely need them. As you can see from the work that I presented, our populations were well below the economic threshold of 250 aphids per plant. So even though the aphid populations are below that, sometimes farmers still use the insecticides, and that contributes to the evolution of resistance. So I encourage you to spray when populations reach a threshold. If aphids have developed resistance to pyrethroids, they have the potential to develop resistance to those other modes of action, those other insecticides. So populations that reach 250 aphids per plant and continue to grow will reduce yield. Populations below this, not so much. This can help you more effectively time the application of insecticide and also determine whether you need to spend money on such an input.
Thank you so much, everyone. You have the Q&A portion down there, so please feel free to type in your questions. The first question we got is there data from other states on the percent resistance to pyrethroids?
Yeah, that's a good question. There is some data using some similar methods to ours from Minnesota. And I don't know if those have been fully published yet. I think Bob Cook, Koch, has shared those with growers in Minnesota. Suffice to say, they're in line with what we have seen. That there are high frequency of the aphids with at least one mutation. My sense from, it's been a while since I've looked over that data, they have even more varieties of mutants than we do, which isn't surprising because Minnesota sees, we being Iowa, Minnesota sees a higher frequency and intensity of aphid outbreaks than we do in Iowa. And I think it's fair to say that there's a lot more buckthorn in their part of the world. So they harbor more of the overwintering population than we do.
Yeah, please type any questions in the Q&A portion. With the aphid-resistant varieties out there, I mean, are they more expensive? Are there, like, what are the reasons farmers are not choosing to plant those?
Yeah, I think it's, I don't know if farmers are not choosing to. I think it's farmers may not have full access to them. So many of the seed companies that service the organic market, so these are seed companies that sell non-GMO soybeans, have introgressed aphid-resistant traits into their varieties. What you really want to look for, if you go that route, is a variety with two genes. The genes are abbreviated RAG. If you get RAG 1 and 2 together, you're in good shape. Single trait resistance, not so much. So those companies have made available aphid-resistant varieties of soybeans. Some of the larger commercial ones, I think they've not yet integrated aphid resistance into their GMO varieties. So if a farmer is using a GMO variety for herbicide resistance, they may not be able to find the aphid resistance in there as well. However, things change, people change, companies change, and markets change. So keep an eye out and ask your local dealer if such a product could be available in the future.
It's interesting. I wouldn't have guessed it was the organic market, but that really makes sense. So we did have a question.
Yeah, organic growers don't have access to synthetic insecticides the way conventionals do. And so, yeah, it's more of an existential threat for them than for our conventional growers.
Okay, interesting. So we had a question, what about percentages of soybean aphid populations breaking the resistance of the soybean resistant varieties?
Oh, that's another webinar. I could come back and maybe in the fall we could talk about the durability of the aphid-resistant soybean varieties. There's been about 15 years worth of research and evaluation of those traits. Yes, there are some aphids that can survive on the resistant varieties, but when you mix two resistant traits in one cultivar of soybeans, you go a long way in preventing those aphids becoming resistant to it. So just like we couple multiple Bt traits in corn, we do the same thing with the soybean and aphid resistance. Any other questions, comments?
People are really interested in the resistant varieties. It says, can you talk how the resistant varieties are resistant to?
My lab spent quite a bit of time evaluating these. So if you were to Google this, you might look for RAG, which is an acronym for resistance aphis glycines, RAG. Aphis glycines is the scientific name for soybean aphids. There are, last I looked, I think that we're up to 7 or 8 RAG genes that provide resistance against the soybean aphid. The first one was called rag 1 because it was the first one. Then there was rag 2, 3, 4, and I think we've gotten to a point where there's several more. The way we think the resistance works is the aphid feeds on the plant, and then its health is affected by the rag traits in the plant. So they can still find the plant, they can still get on it and feed, but over time, their health is going to diminish such that their populations will decline, if not be aphid free. And the more rag traits you have in your soybean cultivar, the more robust the resistance is. Early on, there was some disappointment because some breeders and companies released soybean varieties that only had one rag trait, and there was some resistance. Some called it tolerance, but it wasn't enough for people to get excited about. Over time, some breeders, the late Walt Fair at Iowa State, incorporated 2 traits, and the resistance was much improved to the point where we basically got aphid-free varieties. I think other breeders have incorporated some of the others as well, which just goes a long way in maintaining the durability of those traits such that we can use them year in and year out. So far, their use commercially has been really limited, again, mostly to the organic market. So there hasn't been the selection pressure to develop aphids that are going to overcome that resistance in the way that there has been for pyrethroids and other insecticides, which often get used by farmers year in and year out, whether they have an aphid problem or not.
The thiamethoxam foliarly treated showed good draw. Are there concerns about a switch to a neonicotinoid in these situations? Do you envision that becoming dominant over the pyrethroids?
Yeah, so the biggest concern, I think, for our farmers when it comes to switching to a new mode of action, a new product, is the cost. Pyrethroids are one of the cheapest forms of insecticides available to farmers. The next products that they would go to are going to be more expensive. And some are going to come with restrictions, like the chlorpyrifos, the organophosphates. Those are restricted use pesticides. They're not as easy to use. There's some safety concerns that pyrethroids don't have. But overall, the cost is going to be greater. So going forward, I think our listeners, our farmers want to think about that as they start preparing themselves to manage pyrethroid resistant aphids. You may want to rethink using insecticides on a preventative prophylactic manner. You may want to reconsider scouting so that you don't incur a cost that makes your return on investment lower.
Makes good sense. Any other questions? We need another few minutes to type in questions, but I don't see any other questions at the moment. So I want to thank you again, Matt, so much. This was really informative. We do not, for those of us who attend regularly, we do not have a Pest in Progress webinar in August, but we should have one scheduled in September. So just watch the newsletter and all that for scheduling. And thank you again, Matt. Oh, you have something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think I left with your group the websites for our suction trap network and the integrated crop pest management insect website. It's now July 16th. We're getting into aphid season. And I probably should have said this earlier, I apologize, but now is a good time to start thinking about scouting. And then scout through, the end of August, end of July, August. That's when growers are typically going to see aphids arise and get into the threshold levels. So sorry, I should have said that earlier.
No, thank you so much. And those, Kelsey did share those links in the chat. So everyone grab those and bookmark those. Both of those are great resources.
And I just need to thank the Iowa Soybean Association and USDA for helping fund this work. And hopefully your listeners found it useful.
I'm sure they did. So thank you all very much for attending. I found it very useful and sure everyone else did. A great number of questions. So I will see everybody in a couple of months. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.